Bonsoir. C'est un plaisir de vous adresser d'ici à Yémen. Je regrette que je ne peux pas être là parmi vous à cause de conférences nationales de dialogue qui m'empêchent ici. I know that Farea will understand that there is important work here in Yemen, and we are aware of his contributions. We miss you, Farea. We hope that you will be back soon. To take things forward in this country. Let me immediately thank my colleagues in the Human Rights Center, particularly Professor Simons, and also in the communications unit for all their efforts to arrange things this evening, and of course our counterparts in the other organizations with which we're cooperating this evening. I know you're going to have a very interesting exchange, so I don't want to take much time right now. It's just to take a few moments to share a few thoughts about the serious subject of the use of drones, which is capturing so much attention these days, and rightly so. You know that in the news, many people are very much concerned about the seemingly unrestrained use of this technology and the damage that is being caused. I'm just going to draw your attention to a few of the issues before Farea and Alex take up the subject through Farea's testimony and also through Alex's specific recount of the position of Amnesty International on the legal questions. Let me just observe a few important points. A drone as such is not by its nature as a technical instrument either of war or of criminal investigation or use a prohibited instrument under international law. In fact, it's not necessarily even a harmful instrument. We're aware this week in the Philippines of the use of drones for very positive humane purposes, notably reconnaissance, search and rescue, and other humanitarian purposes in the terrible context of the typhoon, which has caused such damage in that country. So it's not a drone per se which is our object of concern, but rather the specific usages to which it has been invoked, specifically in the context of counterterrorism and in the putative war on terror. Let us just reflect briefly on a few of these invocations. In the context of criminal law, including counterterrorism, of course, the use of drones for so-called targeted assassinations raises important questions of extrajudicial killings in the absence of due process of law and without due diligence that's required in order to respect the right to life and associated civil rights of those who are alleged to have committed crimes or to be involved in criminal activity. So this is a first and primary consideration of which we should all be concerned and demands a close scrutiny of the way of drones for so-called targeted assassinations raises important questions of extrajudicial killings in the absence of due process of law and without due diligence that's required in order to respect the right to life and associated civil rights of those who are alleged to have committed crimes or to be involved in criminal activity. So this is a first and primary consideration of which we should all be concerned and demands a close scrutiny of the way in which drones are being used. Second of all, in the context of humanitarian law and this war on terror, there are important issues that arise in the context, for example, of imminence and supposed necessity to attack combatants, as they may be so called, without necessarily the required level of distinction that international humanitarian law requires. That is to say, that the use of drones for such killings is often not sufficiently discriminatory, and in fact causes widespread civilian damage and death, injury and death, as a result of so-called collateral damage. This again raises questions of whether the use of drones are consistent with the requirements, the standards of international humanitarian law. Now, assuming that these have been somehow substantiated and would be merited in cases of imminence and necessity, there are still the important questions of policy, whether in fact the use of drones helps or harms in the pursuit of the purposes for which they are invoked. And here I think we have to ask whether this instrument works for the objectives to which it is pursued. And here, if in fact the use of drones is causing more harm than good, then this is manifestly bad policy. I'm also concerned, and I think this is something we must reflect upon to the extent that the war on terror and such invocations are now of universal effect and concern, that this is not in fact a slippery slope to undermining the rule of law and respect for human rights in general. We may all of us ask ourselves in which situations this kind of technology might otherwise be used looking ahead to the complexities of so-called modern warfare. I know you'll hear more about these issues this evening, and there's no doubt that as our world gets smaller, these are issues of concern to everyone. These touch us all, whether through media or through our relations, transfrontier, and the way in which we are all interconnected by morality, and particularly by our commitment to a universal respect for human rights and the rule of law. I'm sure that this evening these issues and more will be raised, and we will be challenged to reflect deeply upon them. I wish you a full and serious exchange. Thank you very much.
I think that for many people, when they certainly I think in the general public, there's a sort of sterile and safe image of drones that people have in their mind. It's the notion of there's the known terrorist mastermind dashing down some remote desert track in a Land Rover, and we know that that person has just committed or is about to commit some sort of heinous act, and suddenly out of the sky with unbelievable precision this rocket comes hurtling down and with pinpoint accuracy takes out the terrorist mastermind. Well, Amnesty International has just issued a report that seeks to convey a message to the world that there's a very different face that is the reality of the drone program. Our report focuses in particular on North Waziristan in Pakistan, but I believe the descriptions, the findings, the human stories that come through so wrenchingly in this report could apply to many other parts of the world as well. The report's title, I think, in many respects, conveys very simply sort of the human fear and loss that does lie behind drone attacks. It's simply called "Will I Be Next?" And amongst other things, as I'll share with you, that sense of unrelenting fear and terror amongst civilian populations in very remote communities and villages in North Waziristan is perhaps one of the most anguished findings that our researchers came across. So to counter that sterile kind of safe pinpoint accuracy image that most have, I want to begin by sharing with you, and they're not happy stories as you would imagine, a couple of accounts from our report which do tell that very different story. And the first is that of Mamana Bibi, a 68-year-old woman who was tending her crops in Gundi Kala village on the afternoon of October 24th, 2012, when she was killed instantly by 2 Hellfire missiles fired from a drone aircraft. She was standing in our family fields gathering okra to cook that evening, recalled Zubar Rehman, one of Mamana Bibi's grandsons, who was about 119 feet away, also working in the fields at the time. Mamana Bibi's 3 granddaughters, Nabila, aged 8, Asma, aged 7, and Naima, aged 5, were also in the field, around 115 and 92 feet away from their grandmother to the north and south, respectively. All of these measurements come from the very accurate work that our researchers were able to do. Around 92 feet to the south, another of Mamana Bibi's grandsons, 15-year-old Rehman Saeed, was walking home from school with his friend Shahidullah, also aged 15. Accustomed to seeing drones overhead, Mamana Bibi and her grandchildren continued their daily routine. The drone planes were flying over our village all day and night, flying in pairs, sometimes 3 together. We had grown used to them flying over our village all the time, Zubair Rehman continued. I was watering our animals, and my brother was harvesting our maize crop, said Nabila. Then, before her family's eyes, Mamana Bibi was blown into pieces by at least 2 Hellfire missiles fired concurrently from a US drone aircraft. There was a very bad smell, and the area was full of smoke and dust. I couldn't breathe properly for several minutes, said Zubair. The explosion was very close to us. It was very strong. It took me into the air and pushed me onto the ground, added Nabila. She later ventured to where her grandmother had been picking vegetables earlier in the day. I saw her shoes. We found her mutilated body a short time afterwards, recalled Nabila. It had been thrown quite a long distance away by the blast, and it was in pieces. We collected as many different parts from the field and wrapped them in a cloth. Asma and Nabila both sustained shrapnel injuries to their arms and shoulders. Shahidullah received shrapnel injuries to his lower back, while Rehman Saeed sustained a minor shrapnel injury to his foot. But 3-year-old Safdar, who had been standing on the roof of their home, fell 10 feet to the ground, fracturing several bones in his chest and shoulders. Because he did not receive immediate specialist medical care, he continues to suffer complications from the injury. A few minutes after the first strike, a second volley of drone missiles was fired, hitting a vacant area of the field around 9 feet from where Mamana Bibi was killed. Mamana Bibi's grandsons, Kalimul and Samadur Rehman, were there, having rushed to the scene when the first volley struck. Kalimul recalled, I was sitting at my home drinking tea when suddenly I heard a sound of explosions. I ran outside and saw the rocket and had left a big crater in the field and dead animals, and the area was full of smoke and dust. I could not see my grandmother anywhere. As the 2 boys surveyed the area, they discovered their grandmother had been blown to pieces. Fearing further attacks, the 2 tried to flee the area when the second volley of missiles was fired. Kalimul was hit by shrapnel, breaking his left leg and suffering a large, deep gash to his thigh. This time I felt something hit my leg, and the wave of the blast knocked me unconscious, he said. Later I regained consciousness and noticed that my leg was wounded, and my cousin was carrying me on his back to the main road. The family home was badly damaged in the strikes, with 2 rooms rendered uninhabitable. In total, 9 people, all of them children, except Kalimul Rehman, were injured in the drone strikes that killed Mamana Bibi. Well, that's a very different human face to the whole story of drones, isn't it? And I want to share with you just briefly one other account. This is at dusk on 6th of July 2012, when a group of laborers from Zawi Sidgi village had gathered at a tent after a long day of work in the summer heat. It was our gathering place, usually at the end of the day. After work, the villagers sit together and talk to each other about our daily business, said Hassan, a chromite miner and Zawi Sidgi resident who was praying in a local mosque at the time. 4 drones that had been hovering overhead for some minutes and were clearly visible to residents in the crimson dusk light. Suddenly, witnesses recalled, the sound of multiple missiles could be heard piercing the sky, hitting the tent and killing at least 8 people instantly. When we went to where the missiles hit to help people, we saw a very horrible scene. Body parts were scattered everywhere. I saw bodies without heads and bodies without hands or legs. Everyone in the hut was cut to pieces. Some villagers ventured to where the tent once was to search for survivors and sift through the devastation. Then a few minutes later, again, the drones, which witnesses recalled hearing hovering overhead after the first attack, fired another series of missiles targeting those who had come to the scene. At least another 6 people died instantly, and at least another 2 died minutes later from the wounds sustained in the attack. Well, imagine if either of these cases, rather than missiles being fired from a drone flying far overhead, triggered by a controller hundreds or thousands of kilometers away, imagine if the attack was carried out by soldiers on the ground, closing in on a 68-year-old grandmother tending her crops, or firing an RPG at a tent in which tired laborers were resting after a long day's work. Well, suddenly the human rights and humanitarian law concerns are much clearer, and the criticism and outrage would, I think, be more obvious. But with drones, somehow, that distance, that lack of a pilot up there right above in the sky gives it a different flavor, makes it easier to dismiss complaints that the attack may be unlawful. No human in the cockpit, so suddenly no sense of human failure or wrongdoing, and no need for human accountability. Well, our report is one more contribution to the important effort to change that discourse and debate about drones, and to make it clear that the concerns about possible violations, very serious violations, you hear it in those 2 accounts, of a whole range of international human rights and international humanitarian laws, are very real and can no longer be shrouded in some sort of mechanical secrecy. The report, as I said, focuses on drone attacks in North Waziristan, Pakistan, but the concerns, the analysis, certainly the legal issues, and importantly, the human dimension are undoubtedly similar elsewhere. I expect we will hear much overlap in Farea's comments. You certainly hear it in the heart-wrenching accounts of Mamana Bibi's death and in the slaughter at Zawi Siddi. And it comes through in all of the research that went into our report. The human impact, human rights violations, breaches of humanitarian law is wide-ranging. The toll, untold number of people, women, men, and children killed, while some, even many, may have been involved in armed groups and possibly even in active combat, it is clear that many are civilians, including young children and the elderly. And for every person killed, there are many more who are injured, often very serious injuries, such as lost limbs. Clearly, there is a considerable destruction of property, homes, fields, and with the destruction, people's livelihoods, often everything they own. The fear, stress, and anxiety associated with drones can be nearly as debilitating as the impact of actual attacks. One person described it this way to Amnesty: everyone is scared, and they can't get out of their house without any tension and from the fear of drone attacks. People are mentally disturbed as a result of the drone flights. We can't sleep because of the plane's loud sound. Even if they don't attack, we still always have the fear of attack in our mind. Often overlooked is the particular impact of drones on women and girls. North Waziristan society is intensely patriarchal, and most women and girls have limited access to education and public life. And women describe to Amnesty researchers how powerless they feel to influence decisions made by their communities and even their families about supporting or even becoming involved in armed groups like the Taliban. And those decisions, of course, then put communities and households at dramatically increased risk of being targeted in a drone attack. One woman told Amnesty researchers, I have a lot of reservations about bringing the Taliban inside the house. Multiple times I have asked my younger son not to bring Taliban into our guest room, but he never listens. My fear is that it can be targeted at any time by drones or the army. Another woman said similarly, women have no option but to follow what they decide. All the major decisions are being taken by the male members of our family, including whether or not to invite members of the Taliban and other groups into the home or provide them with other assistance, and that's what puts us at risk. The toll of drone attacks is made all the worse due to the difficult, harsh, and violent context of life in North Waziristan. There is the reality of being trapped among the various fighting forces in the area, including the Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, Al-Qaeda-linked groups, Pakistani armed forces, all in addition to the terror of the overhead drones. All are, of course, responsible for grave abuses, and in a sense, therefore, each compounds the others. And it adds a particularly sinister dimension in that along with this deadly maze of violence, there is a deadly pattern of recrimination and suspicion. In fact, one group, the Mujahideen Khorasan, linked to Al-Qaeda, is now entirely focused on identifying and then killing individuals suspected of spying for the CIA for the drone strikes. So you can see how it comes from every direction. The impact of drone attacks is also exacerbated considerably by the extreme poverty in North Waziristan, and in particular the fact that this means people generally lack access to medical facilities in their villages and towns. Getting proper medical care for injuries suffered in a drone attack can be extremely difficult, even impossible. One villager described it this way: there is no hospital in this area. We are in a severe trouble because of this. Sometimes when someone is ill, he dies on the way before reaching the nearest hospital in Miran Shah. It takes 10 hours by car to reach Miran Shah. It is only 60 miles away, but because of the dirt roads, checkposts, curfews, and fighting, there are many delays, and always you are worried about being killed by a bomb planted on the road by militants or the next drone. In our report, we have highlighted a number of very serious dimensions to the design, the implementation, and the oversight of the drone program in North Waziristan. That includes the secrecy and total lack of transparency that cloaks the entire program, including information about attacks, casualties, and the likelihood that there may have been unlawful killings. The lack of any meaningful oversight process or body of the drone program, all the more crucial, of course, given all that secrecy. Oversight is all the more important in the face of that kind of secrecy. Uncertainty about the applicable international legal framework, again, because of the secrecy. In particular, it has been difficult, impossible really, and we flagged this time and time again in our report, to determine whether some or even many of the drone attacks occurred in the context of armed conflict and thus are governed by international humanitarian law in addition to the international human rights provisions that are already applicable. So much secrecy that you can't even figure out what law applies. Concerns that the US's continuing assertion of a global war doctrine, the notion that the US is waging a boundless, borderless war against Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces, lies in the background of all of this. It becomes the basis for US assertions, explicit or implied, that it is lawfully engaged in a global and pervasive armed conflict against a diffuse network of non-state actors in which it is therefore lawful to kill individuals anywhere in the world at any time, whenever US officials deem it appropriate. There are a number of concerns about particular types of drone attacks. This includes, firstly, what have become known as signature attacks, in which the identity of the individuals targeted is not confirmed in any way, and in fact remains totally unknown, but something about their activities, as viewed from the sky, appears to fit some sort of pattern that is deemed suspicious. and thus justifies an attack? Was there some suspicious signature in the way Mamana Bibi was tending her crops? Then there's rescuer attacks, and we heard that in both of those accounts, which are secondary drone strikes that appear to target those trying to help the victims of the initial drone strikes. As I say, we hear that in both of those accounts. And then there's attacks based on an individual's membership in armed groups rather than on the basis of their actual conduct or their direct participation in hostilities. We've also highlighted numerous concerns about the fact that there is a total lack of accountability, redress, and compensation. There are no investigations by US or Pakistani authorities. There is no redress from the US government. In fact, there is not even acknowledgement of the strikes or the casualties, lawful or unlawful, that have occurred. There have been some very token amounts of compensation provided in some cases by Pakistani officials, but not at all close to the losses suffered. Mamani Bibi's family, for instance, was provided with the equivalent of roughly $100 collectively for all of that loss and injury that you heard in that first account. One other notable dimension to the drone program that we have flagged is also the complicity of other governments. Of course, there's a raging debate about the nature, depth, and extent of Pakistani complicity. Even though on one hand Pakistanis complain about the drone attacks, there's also many concerns about ways in which Pakistani officials have been complicit. But in our report, we name other governments as well, governments that we're quite sure are providing intelligence and support that lie behind the attacks. And we name in particular Australia, Germany, and the United Kingdom. My time's going to run out here, so I quickly want to get to some of the conclusions and recommendations that we've highlighted in the report. And they come under, I guess, a general number of themes. It includes the need for transparency and disclosure, for accountability, redress, and compensation, for oversight and review, the need to ensure full compliance with international law, and certainly the need for restrictions and limitations. So this includes certainly in all of the cases we've documented in the reports, the two I've shared with you, but there are many others here. We want US government to publicly disclose all of the facts relevant to those cases, the legal basis that lay behind the attacks, to publicly disclose whether there's been any kind of investigation. Beyond that, we're insisting that there be investigations of all drone attacks when there are reasonable grounds in any way to believe that there were unlawful killings. And those investigations, of course, must be towards the goal of ensuring that wrongdoers face justice and that victims receive redress. We want to see a lot of disclosure with respect to some of the policy and criteria that lie behind the drone program. This includes disclosing the legal and factual criteria that are used for identifying targets. Make public the memoranda that reflects the policy concerning lethal targeting. Disclose the criteria that is used to determine what's a civilian target versus what's a militant or combatant. Disclosure of the number of people killed in Pakistani drone attacks. Disclose what kinds of signatures justify a signature strike. What are the rules that are in place for preventing unintended and unlawful death and injury? We're calling for there to be a designated investigative entity set up, such as an inspector general or a special prosecutor or someone with those kinds of powers. Pushing for the US government to refrain from the position it has taken to this point in time, which is to argue in US courts consistently that there should not be any judicial review within the US court system of drone strikes. Reject the global war doctrine and accept that international human rights norms do fully apply in these instances. Accept the principle that whenever there is doubt that a person may be a civilian, then the person is considered to be a civilian. Doubt goes in favor of the person. End rescuer attacks and protect informants. That's just some of the recommendations. There's many more. The last point I want to make is, the report, I think, conveys a very strong message with respect to the legal and the moral imperative that lies behind the need for substantial changes to the drone program. But we've also highlighted that there's an obvious strategic and self-interested rationale as well for the US government. And in a letter to President Obama a few months ago from a number of US-based NGOs, including Amnesty International, the American Civil Liberties Union, Human Rights First, Human Rights Watch, and others, we closed by making that very point. As senior administration officials have recognized, US targeted killing policies and practices set a precedent for other nations, particularly as weaponized drone technology becomes more widely available. Lowering the threshold for the use of force outside armed conflicts could be in breach of international law, set a dangerous precedent, and weaken the US government's ability to argue for constraints on lethal targeting operations of other states. This is a downward spiral in so many ways, and we have to find a way to turn that around. Thank you.
Anyhow, I want to talk a bit probably slightly because I think I have said every smart thing I have. So I'll touch on the drones, but I want to first start with a little of a political background about what's happening in Yemen in general. Yemen, I mean, just to highlight the other issues, drone strikes is not the only issue Yemen is facing. We have 13 million Yemenis go to bed starving every night. That is more than half of the population of the country. A humanitarian crisis in a continuous deterioration and going into worse and worse every new day. However, Yemen in 2011 had a public revolution against the regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh at that time. However, the world calls it the Yemen model. The international community, Western countries, brought an initiative into Yemen, enforcing some sort of a political deal, giving it the honorary name of the GCCD, which provided immunity for President Saleh in return for transferring power, which immunity was done very well. Transferring power was maybe no, half-half. And then his vice president became a president also. In a brief, in 2008, Yemen had a political crisis between the main opposition parties and the president, and by that time they extended the election of the parliament. They did a political deal between them. In 2011, the revolution came enough to the opposition and enough to the government and everything. However, the international community brought a deal that solved or responded to 2008 political crisis. But it claims it responded to 2011 revolution. However, it was just a deal between the elites who had a problem in 2008. I found it a very important to mention this because also the current counterterrorism policy in Yemen and drone strike is not new, but goes back into that time. It just had escalated in the last few years with the new president in power, with who enjoys a very good relationship with the United States of America. Unfortunately, as in the past, counterterrorism has been a cash cow and legitimacy cow for rulers. So you are with us against Al-Qaeda, then you get as much cash as you want, you got as much military support also you wanted. And that is, I think, also in a strategic view, is one of the reasons why today we are in this specific issue is because anything transferred into a cash cow, somebody never solves or never gets over unless you're very stupid, which obviously Saleh was not. Drones is a new problem in this massive level, but actually the first US striker drone conducted in Yemen was in 2002. Under the Bush time, 2 or 3 striker drones were conducted in Yemen, compared to the Obama tsunami for drones the last few years. Amongst all of these drones, I want to specific what you already mentioned, the signature strike drones, which was extensively used in Yemen. Signature strikes is one of the most, I would say, death rates in Yemen of drones. What does that mean exactly is UNICEF is killing people in the ground. It doesn't know their names. It doesn't know their ages. It doesn't know their affiliation. It has nothing to do. It has no idea who are these people. And a suspicious behavior, what does that mean exactly? You can be any between the age of 15 and 65, and you can be probably armed in some specific area. So, for example, if I am going with a couple of friends to a wedding, according to this exact criteria, we are a legitimate target of the United States of America. And that's actually where a high number of deaths has happened in Yemen because of this suspicious behavior, which is behavior decided on a very vague criteria and have killed many tens of people. Usually the claim publicly or off the record is the drone strikes are only used when capture is not possible and when this is legitimate threat to the United States of America, and this is also someone a leader inside Al-Qaeda. Out of the tens of the strike, only 4 strikes in Yemen meet that exact criteria. And the rest are people either easily captured or people who are not leaders or meet none of or not all of these criteria. I guess, and one of the other issues is the secrecy of the kill list here. And it's not when people would host Taliban or Qaeda, no one in their house, obviously, but they do not know that this person might be Al Qaeda. I mean, it happened in many areas I'm aware of, at least also in my village and in other areas in Hadramaut, where people, either would drive with someone or would host someone in their houses. And Yemen is a very hospitable country, and they have no idea, even though they know this guy, that he is in this list. And you can host it because you're a social leader and probably off the record, or I mean, at night you work for Al Qaeda, but no one knows that. And that very exact thing have caused the death of tens of people. Because somebody what would do is I will either kick you out of my area or at least stay away from you if I know that you're in the target list of the US drone strike. But no one ever knows who's in this list. And you can be in this list because you simply hang out with someone you don't know who's in this list, or you said hi, or you shake the hand with someone you don't know. Another problem with this is I think it has killed, this is an obvious case in Hadramaut, it has killed moderate religious leaders who were preaching against Al-Qaeda. Some people like this in Hadramaut, famous religious leader came back after he was speaking against Al-Qaeda. And then Al-Qaeda says, why we want to talk to you. So he went and he's trying to convince them to stop it. And on the way back, he was drowned. It's a massive lose when you think about it. It's not just a civilian. It's not just someone, happens to be there, but someone who is working against this, working against Al-Qaeda, working to take down Al-Qaeda is killed by US. I think also it has changed, and we spoke about this in Uzbekistan. It has increased the culture of fear. It has, I think, at one point changed the domestic culture about things, changed the type of fear people would have. So in one of the areas of Yemen, there is a lady who says, a man who says that famously, I quote him many times, he says, in the past our women used to tell children, go to bed or I will call your father. Now they say, go to bed or I will call the drones. It's unbelievable how much this has changed the domestic culture of people, the fear, whereas what you can threaten 5-year-old kids with. And that is, and not just on a psychological level traumatizing, but also on, I think, a security military level horrible, because it has made people distracted from the fear of Al-Qaeda into the fear of something else, the United States of America. And that is the exact thing Al-Qaeda wants, meaning that Al-Qaeda does not mind losing 10 or 20 or 30 of its members to approve a point of view. And its main point of view is that the Yemenis are in war with the United States of America. And this simply is working great. And I think the West somehow, sometimes, especially in the United States, we're obsessed with the statistics. How many people did we kill from Al-Qaeda? How many did we not? And unfortunately, in that part of the world, that's not how it works. It's not only numbers. Meaning that Al-Qaeda does not mind losing this big number if it can approve to people that we are in war with the US. That's it. And that makes the United States of America and the counterterrorism more very defensive, responsive, rather than a comprehensive offensive policy. So, in another strategic term, I think a problem with this is it has underestimated the power of the Yemeni government and the legitimacy of the Yemeni government. In few cases, in very few cases, probably the government was not capable of reaching to these people and arresting them. But what it has done is it makes the government look like it's weak, and it damages the faith in the Yemeni security forces, which is, whether for Al-Qaeda related issues or non-Al-Qaeda related security problems, that has made the Yemeni government look very weak and very ineffective, because someone else is doing the job that it sometimes can do by itself. It has caused tons of assassinations against mercenary leaders in Yemen, in few cases because they were accused of giving information to the United States of America about Al-Qaeda. In fact, this was 2 months ago, I think. Professor Gregory Johnson broke this story in the Atlantic about an 8-year-old boy, the Yemeni Republican Guards, which is funded by US, or cooperating with the US about collecting information, used an 8-year-old boy to put the tracking, what do you call it in English? The tracking, the device into someone, into someone's house or cook. That is, I think, war crime at its best. I want to speak about some cases, just very shortly about few experiences I have talked to people who were involved in them about the drone strikes. Recently, actually, I was walking in 30 minutes outside Sana'a in an area called Khawlan, and I noted that area was targeted by drone strike. One of the teachers in the school was killed, and he was just happened to be in the wrong place, and he didn't know that he was riding with bad people. Quotation again, you don't know who they are. If he knew, he would have not come. So he was hitchhiking with them, and he was killed. When his brother came to pick him, he was killed with another few other civilians in the car. His brother says, I went and I saw the most fine body, or the most recognized body that it looks like a human, and I said, this is my brother. And he's not sure that what he took home and buried in the grave is his brother's body. It just, that was the only thing he could take from the car. The rest were already too damaged of the body. And he's even today not sure that this was actually his brother, whatever he did. But he could not go home and empty handed. In the same school. So the second day, that was happened at night. The second day, his students, his teacher, waited for him. He taught for 10 or 12 years. I don't remember exactly. Never missed a day of school. So second day, his students were surprised. They waited for 1 hour, 2 hours, and suddenly the news broke that he was killed last night, and so on. If now a teacher in the school is late in the morning, students start to freak out. Though he can be just late. But that's what is fearful has changed into a crazy one. Rahman al-Awlaki, another story of an American citizen, 15 years old, was also killed by US drone strikes over 2 years, 15 years old American citizen. Another story is for a mother. I spoke about her, well, in Jaar, in Aryan, with this lady. She did not know where her son was. She was waiting 2 months for him to get married, and in 2 months he was supposed to get married. And that day he was somewhere else where she was not. And she only got to know that her son was dead actually when someone random actually showed her a video and his cell phone he took as an eyewitness. And he said, hey, is this your son? She said, yeah. She had to identify her son through a video, her son's body through a video on a stranger's cell phone. Another famous story was Jabir Shabwani, deputy governor of Marib, and was actually a security leader working to combat Al-Qaeda. But I think this is also another interesting angle where drone strikes were manipulated by Saleh. Sometimes he was not happy with this man, so he gave the United States of America his location to say this is a terror, and he was killed. Very powerful tribal leader, very, someone was playing critical role in this stability of the government. The second day after he was bombed, his tribe bombed oil pipelines. I think in 20 days we lost oil costs equal to the aid of the United States for 4 or 5 years. Unbelievable. Needless to mention that there is not a single compensation or an apology had been issued by the United States of America to these civilian victims. It freaks me out in the strategic level because I'm aware of some cases where Al Qaeda has their compensation for locals for causing harm to them, sometimes even for being in their houses while it was bombed. And that is unbelievably fearful for me as an when the very wrong group does the very right thing, issue an apology and pay compensation, while the United States of America did not even admit that it killed civilians in Yemen. This is not just about civilians and not about social culture, but about I hate the term collateral damage because it's so misleading that it talks about things in a plastic way, but it's so misleading that it suggests that it's actually working, and then there is this on the side thing. And while it's actually the opposite, the collateral damage here is for Al Qaeda. It is causing the collateral damage for Al Qaeda, not the opposite. You say something is counterproductive when mostly it's working, and then in some cases, this is the opposite. The numbers of Qaeda have increased by hundreds, thousands. But we had 300 in 2009. Now I think we have thousands, mainly because of drone strikes. It's like as if drone strikes are the PR of Al Qaeda in Yemen. And every time there is even social anger at Al Qaeda, this is problem is no one understands. This is not traditional war. This is a war of mistakes. The less you make, the more you win. When Al Qaeda makes more mistakes, it loses. When the Yemeni government or the US government makes more mistakes, it loses. And they'll breathe. The drones have done much more mistakes than Al Qaeda has done in Yemen. And that has been a great recruiting tool for Al Qaeda. I'm aware of some cases where Al Qaeda itself has actually recruited people whom their civilian relatives were killed by drone strike. It has not weakened Al Qaeda, I don't think. It has empowered it. It has even, the scary thing about this is, even in some cases where I know it killed actually Al Qaeda members and there was zero humanitarian cost, it has tried to target people like Nader Shabari or Saeed Shahri 5 or 7 times. And always the Yemeni government or the US government claims that this person was actually killed, and then they end up the second day laughing about the Yemeni government. Even when it has killed them, it made some sort of heroism about these people in younger generation's age. Most powerful country in the world, and your country are trying to attack you down, and it's like a movie. This influence for you of how you can escape such death and how you can face and bravery. So even when it works in targeting actually these people, it has not been successful in the way you would imagine it to be or you would want it to be. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure this out, but it has been obviously done more harm than good. I want to conclude with one also of the issues that we mentioned about. Not only in Yemen, we don't. It's also the issue of a double strike or rescue strike. So it has become almost impossible to rescue someone if they're relative from a drone strike. Drone strike would actually sometimes target and then would stay flying above for hours. So people cannot get closer actually. It's murder. And in most cases, these people are civilians. And that has, I think, increased the rage, the anger against the United States and the Yemeni government. Contrary to what everyone reports, Yemen is not a lawless country. From this point of view, the US is the lawless country. The one ruling its constitution, international law, everything. Because in Yemen, the law is very clear, even if it's not written. You kill someone, you get killed. You kill relatives, I will go fight you and find you. And I would even, that's historical fact about a country like Yemen. When we became a bit lawless when current laws started to come, but our tribal laws and social laws are famous there and for thousands of years, and we were always fine with that. And the absence of that law, the presence of that social historical law, along with too much murder and killing by the United States, is terrifying me about the future. Making me wish that even with this whole mess that it had made the US or Yemen or the world or anyone any more safe. I even in the world, I hope it made it more safe, but I have not seen that, and I don't know what after the future generation will have to face, whether in the West or in Yemen or everywhere out of this um, this catastrophic consequence. I guess I'll stop there, and then if there is any question, I will very happily take it. Thank you very much.